Niyamas. The niyamas are rung or limb number 2 of the 8 rungs or limbs, Ashtanga. Ashtanga Yoga. Ashta means 8, as we've talked about. So this is number 2. If you recall, we talked about the yamas. The yamas had to do predominantly with my relationship with the world out here, and very much with the people of the world out there. The niyamas starts to move inward, and it's more about my relationship with me. Me as a body, breathing, personality, mind-based person. I have a relationship with the world and the people out there. The yamas is predominantly about that. The niyamas is predominantly about me dealing with me. And obviously there's a tremendous amount of overlap between these things, which is one of the reasons that they are called limbs as well as rungs. It's not just this, then this, then this, then this. It's not that we gain complete mastery over the yamas, checklist, check that off the list. Now I'm going to move on to the niyamas. We practice them all, and that's the limbs concept of anga. The rungs concept, we see that we see for ourselves, our own experience, that they do build upon one another. So now in this business of the niyamas, of me relating to me, the first niyama, the first of the 5, is saucha, which is usually described generally as purifying. The word purifying is there. It could also mean balancing, or it could be something like making healthy body and mind. The key there is that it's about body and mind. And it's me acknowledging that I live in a body. I have a body. Body is not ultimately who I am. I am that drastu, I am consciousness, or something like that. But I have a body, so I'm operating outward through a body. And I have a mind. I may have some aspects of my mind that are sort of less than perfect. I have some habits of my mind that are less than perfect. But I am operating outward through a mind, and I am operating outward through a body. Saucha, the simple principle of saucha, is to make the body and the mind balanced, purified, healthy. What do you do with the body? If one were to make a checklist, it could be a very, very long checklist of what to do with the physical body. In terms of the 8 rungs and the 5 niyamas, it's not an attempt to give this long checklist that these are the rules of what you must do to purify your body. But at a minimum, it has something to do with having regular sleeping habits. It has something to do with eating good food. It has something to do with physical exercise. In modern postural yoga, there have been a tremendous amount of adaptations and advancements helping people work with their bodies to make them solid and healthy and flexible so that they can do the remainder of these rungs of what Ashtanga Yoga is about, so that you can ultimately have the direct experience of being one with that lake of consciousness that we were talking about. So we work with the physical body, having regular sleep. The cycle, we naturally go through a cycle of activity in the day, and then the body needs its rest. The brain too needs its rest. This is a part of dealing with the body. Purifying the mind. What does that mean to purify the mind? It means developing attitudes, and there's other attitudes that are described elsewhere in the Yoga Sutras that are a part of cultivating attitudes. Has to do with the mind. And we see that the way in which I'm living the yamas in those relationships to other people, if I'm pushing against other people, if I find that I'm taking the time from other people as examples, if I'm doing that, I am doing it. Somebody internally is doing that. This is the habits of the mind, and I need to work on that at the level of my own mind. This is the principle of saucha, to train my own body and mind. The second niyama is santosh or santosha. It means contentment. It's cultivating contentment. One of the things that sometimes happens with a misunderstanding of the whole of yoga and of Ashtanga Yoga and of contentment is you see a thing that says the goal of yoga is to have a peaceful, calm, tranquil mind. No, that was Abhyasa. We talked about that in the first section, Abhyasa and Vairagya. That's a part of the process, but it's actually preparation. And contentment, too, is part of the foundation of what we're trying to do. So what we're doing with santosh is cultivating a content state of mind that says, I have the tools that I need to do these practices. I have the ability. I am content with what's around me. I don't need another house. I don't need to have 3 or 4 cars. I don't need to have more millions of dollars. It's easy for the desire list of our untrained mind. Remember, Saucha, the untrained mind, it's easy for it to have lots of habits and expectations of what's going to bring me satisfaction or contentment in life. And that's not the meaning here of santosh. It's the recognition, we cultivate it gradually. It's the recognition that I have contentment. I am content with what I have. I have the instruments, I have the life, I have the situation to be able to do this process of yoga. I have enough around me. There's 2 words that sometimes get sort of mixed up. One is contentment and the other is satisfied. If you have slept through the night and you have not eaten a meal since around sunset of the night before, you wake up, you get out of bed, and you're hungry. And so you have a nice, good, healthy breakfast. Why are you having a nice, good, healthy breakfast? Because you're purifying your body. Saucha, you're having a good, healthy breakfast. When you finish the breakfast, you feel satisfied. Your hunger is satisfied. That's not the same usage of word as the word contentment. Contentment is more the one that says, I have designed a good lifestyle. I'm doing saucha. I'm training my body and my breath. I'm doing good with my relationships with other people through the yamas. Things are pretty good. I'm learning how to do this stuff. I have some form or another of educational training. I'm doing work in the world that is serving other people. And because of all of this, I'm cultivating an attitude of contentment. So there's a discernment between contentment and satisfaction. The third niyama is tapas. Tapas has to do with training the senses. Sometimes tapas is done to an extreme and is misunderstood, and it's things like violating the body in some extreme practices. At some extreme, there's things like people claiming to be yogis laying on beds of nails, and in some religious orders or sects, they will beat on themselves with leather whips and things like this. And these can be called things being done for the sake of tapas. And that it's beating up on yourself so that you can absorb the pain. And that's not what tapas is about. Tapas is about training our senses, smelling, tasting, seeing, touching, and hearing, and our sensory motor activities. The word tapas literally translates as fire. What it's referring to is the emotional fire. Think of any habit that you've ever had. If it's too much caffeine or you've been eating too much fat in your diet or too much sugar or too much coffee or quitting smoking cigarettes, aside from the physiological responses, withdrawal from doing these kind of actions, notice that something happens in the mind. We all know this. There's an emotional fire that happens with it. It's difficult. If you're trying to stop that behavior, you're trying to change a habit pattern, why is it hard? Because you're doing good with letting go of this thing, this activity, and you do good with it for a few hours or a few days. And the next thing you know, you're back at it again, right? There's an emotion, there's a strong, intense emotion that goes on with it. When we are doing this process of purifying the body and mind, there is a natural internal resistance to it. When we talked in the first section about the obstacles that come, one of them is losing the ground that you have gained. This is a place where this happens. You lose the ground you gain. You've been doing really good with some aspect of self-training. Maybe it was the one about ahimsa that you've been practicing not pushing against your spouse. And all of a sudden one day you push and it doesn't feel nice emotionally. And then sometime you're feeling in a bad mood and you catch yourself about to take it out on some other person. You don't even tell them about it. You're holding it internally. And you're riding through the emotional fire. This is tapas. It's the willingness. It is the willingness to recognize that this stuff is not easy. It's difficult, and sometimes there's a fire. There's an emotional resistance to it. And tapas means the willingness to ride through the storm. Of the 5 niyamas, which is rung or limb number 2 of the 8, which is called ashta or ashtanga, the 4th of those niyamas is svadhyaya. Sometimes that is translated by people as repeating mantras. That's not what it's about. Repeating mantras is a very, very useful part of practice. But in the old-fashioned traditional teachings of yoga, where things are written down in Yoga Sutras or Bhagavad Gita or Upanishads in these various texts, in the way that these are described, literally every sentence in our common language, when we will talk about, when you read a poem, you read the verses of a poem. If you were referring to that, speaking in terms of Sanskrit in some of these old texts, you would say, we may say we are reading verses of it, but the way that it would be more traditionally said is you are reading the mantras of it. So it simply means the recorded teachings. And so svadhyaya means practicing that which is described in those written, outlined teachings. So when we are practicing the yamas and the niyamas, and we are doing that in our relationships with other people, and we're doing saucha internally, purifying my own body and mind, and we're sort of following the instructions, we're following the outlines, that is svadhyaya. So the svadhyaya actually means looking at the instructions and following the instructions and doing introspections. Looking within, looking at the nature of my own habit patterns. This is svadhyaya. And it does not just mean walking around chanting Om, 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 or Om Namah Shivaya, or any mantra like that. It's a very good thing to do, but svadhyaya is not limited to that. What it means is follow the verses and practice them. Follow the mantras and practice them. Follow the guidance that's given in the form of verses or mantras. 4th niyama. Notice how these work together. Feel it as you go back through this. Notice the way in which yamas deals with my relationship with the world, predominantly its people out there. And that the niyamas predominantly has to do with me in relationship to me within. And obviously what I do out there and what I'm doing in here go together. I think that's sort of obvious. That's the principle behind it. So the 5th niyama is called Ishvara Pranadhana, which means surrender. And we each get to decide which way in which we want to look at this business of surrender. If you view it in a theistic way, in alignment with your own religious or spiritual background, that's entirely okay. The principle is you are cultivating a spirit of surrender back into that divine force, that deity, that Godhead sometimes called, if you hold it in that kind of way. There's a subtler aspect of it that does not require, yoga does not require you to follow any particular religious view. If you happen to have one, that works fine. It's not telling you what religion to follow or none at all. But the spirit of it is that there is a ground consciousness out of which we emerge, and everything goes back into it. And so it's simply surrendering into that. So what am I surrendering? I'm surrendering everything who I think I am back to where it came from. We get a glimpse of this. Every one of us gets a glimpse of this surrender process when you go to bed at night to go to sleep. You lay down on the bed, you put your head on the pillow, you may scrunch up a little, pull the sheet up over you, and what do? You surrender your senses, you surrender your thinking mind, you surrender your ego back into that from which it awoke this morning at sunrise and got up. You're surrendering, going back in. This is the spirit of Ishvara Pranadhana. It's the surrendering part that's important. And you can think of it as I'm a wave in the ocean of bliss, and I as a wave am surrendering myself back into the ocean. Footnote, I've always been the ocean all along. So it's my own deluded thinking that thinks I'm an individual wave and I'm surrendering back into the ocean. I say that as a footnote. But the important part of Ishvara Pranadhana has to do with this aspect of surrendering. And you can hold that in the way that you want to hold it. If there's a particular tradition that you were grown up in, and you enjoy that tradition, and you have some concept of Godhead, and you want to surrender into that him or her or it, that works entirely okay. But it's not a requirement. The important part of Ishvara Pranadhana is the act of surrendering. So again, the niyamas. Remember the yamas, that the yamas had to do with out there. And in the niyamas, there is saucha, an attitude of purifying my body and my mind. Purifying what? Body and mind. Okay, remember that mind. Purify body and mind. Body and mind. I need to deal with that somehow. And then I'm going to cultivate santosh, contentment. I'm really okay. Sometimes life seems a little bit hard, but in truth, everything's really okay, and I know how to move forward. I know how to take the steps to live happy in the world, and I'm going to be doing this. Tapas, third niyama. I know I'm going through some tough times. I know that there are obstacles we talked about before. I know there are obstacles, but I can ride through the storm. I have the stamina to be able to ride through the storm, and that's tapas, the third niyama. And I'm going to be mindful of the verses, the mantras that are guiding me, and I'm going to put them into practice. And if we're talking about mantras to recite or repeat that help me go inward, I'm going to do that too. And finally, I'm going to cultivate an attitude of surrender, Ishvara Pranadhana. And so there's the 5 niyamas. So the yamas and the niyamas together form this beautiful framework of a foundation for the remainder of the 8 rungs. This is the first 2 rungs. And then, in some sense, notice that each one of the 8 rungs, each sequential one is a little bit more interior than the one before it. So the yamas are about here, the niyamas are about me in here, and then as we move into the other rungs, we're progressively, systematically moving more and more and more inward, subtler and subtler and subtler. So play with it, have fun with it, and enjoy the niyamas. Enjoy the yamas, enjoy the niyamas, and learn and grow and play with it. This is important, serious stuff, but please don't take it too seriously, or you think yourself into worry and you make a big project out of this when it ought to be done gently and lovingly with contentment, with santosh, peace of mind.